They bullied me for being the janitor's daughter, but then I bought the school and fired every last one of them. I used to hide behind the vending machine every afternoon at 3:15 sharp, not because I was sneaking snacks, but because I didn't want the other students to see me waiting for the janitor. My dad, Carl Carter. Everyone at Oak Valley Academy called him Mr. Carter. They said it with a certain smirk, like they were trying to be respectful, but couldn't help but look down at him. He was proud of his job, said it was honest work, said there was dignity in making sure things were clean and safe. He came home every night with tired eyes, aching knees, and stories about overflowing toilets and graffiti he scrubbed off the lockers before anyone saw it. But what I remember most is that he never complained. He whistled old country songs, patched up my torn backpack without being asked, and told me I was going to be someone special one day, someone who didn't need anyone's approval. He believed in me when no one else did. But at Oak Valley, that kind of belief didn't matter. It's the kind of place where kids showed up in Lamborghinis before they had licenses. Where you weren't judged by your grades, but by the label on your jacket. Where last names meant legacy, not love. And where having a janitor for a father was a kind of social leprosy no one wanted to touch. I remember the first time it happened, 6th grade. Dad had just started working at Oak Valley, and we'd just moved to a small apartment nearby to save on gas and expenses. I got in because of a staff tuition waiver, a polite way of saying, "We don't want you here, but your dad mops the floors, so fine." That day, Dad had walked into the hallway while I was with a group of students. He had his mop bucket in one hand and a big smile on his face. "Hey there, kiddo," he called out cheerfully. The others turned. Tora Langston raised one perfectly arched brow. "Is that your dad?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Wait. He's the janitor?" She didn't have to say anything else. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. From that day forward, I was no longer Riley. I was mop girl. Or sometimes scrub girl. Or worse. They laughed when Dad polished the trophy cases. They coughed dramatically when he walked past. Some of them even dropped their drinks on purpose, then called for him like he was a waiter at a cheap restaurant. And when he bent down to clean their messes, I could see their eyes flick to mine, silently daring me to say something. But I never did. I wish I could say I stood up for him. That I shouted at them, reminded them that he worked harder than their entire families combined. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, too afraid that speaking up would only make it worse. And it did get worse. In 7th grade, during Spirit Week, Tara and her friends decided to host a fake cleanup contest. They brought buckets and brooms, all decorated with pink ribbons and glitter, and told everyone to dress up like janitors, in honor of Riley's family business. That week, I went home and cried into my pillow so hard I couldn't breathe. My dad found me and asked what was wrong. I told him it was just homework. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're tough. You're Carter tough." I didn't feel tough. I felt like I was shrinking more every day. I began avoiding eye contact with him at school. I stopped sitting near his office. I even made excuses to stay late in the library so he'd be done cleaning by the time I came out. And that guilt, it ate away at me. Because he was still the same man who worked 3 jobs when my mom died to keep food on the table. Who taught me how to build a bookshelf from scratch. Who saved every spare penny so I could have new shoes for the start of school. But I had let shame silence me. Still, I made myself a promise in that silence. If this was the life I had now, it wouldn't be the life I always had. So I got smart. Not just book smart, strategic. While everyone else was busy curating their Instagram grids and practicing for cheer tryouts, I was teaching myself how stocks worked. I watched YouTube videos on real estate investments while eating cereal. I downloaded free PDFs on business models and tax loopholes. I read biographies of billionaires instead of fashion blogs. And when I couldn't sleep, which was often, I'd stare at the ceiling and imagine what it would feel like to walk back into Oak Valley someday. And own it. To walk those marble halls not as an outsider, but as someone who had the power. I knew it wouldn't happen overnight. But I had patience. And pain? Pain is fuel, if you know how to burn it right. High school was worse in some ways, better in others. Tora's cruelty became more refined, more psychological. She'd smile at me in front of teachers, compliment my outfits, then send me anonymous DMs telling me I'd never escape my janitor blood. Her friends would invite me to parties only to give me the wrong address. They hacked into my school profile once and replaced my yearbook quote with, "Need anything cleaned? I work weekends." But I smiled. I always smiled. Because I had already started something they didn't know about. By 10th grade, I'd launched an anonymous tutoring service. I used a fake name and did all sessions over chat. By the end of the year, I was tutoring half the school, including Tara's own boyfriend, who was flunking calculus and had no idea who I was. By 12th grade, I was running 3 side hustles online, reselling limited edition sneakers, editing college essays, and coding simple websites for local businesses. Every cent I earned went into a portfolio I built with an advisor I met through a scholarship mentor program. He believed in me the moment I laid out my 5-year plan. "You've got vision," he said. "Ruthless clarity. That's rare at your age." But the fire behind my clarity had a name. Oak Valley. I graduated top of my class. Tora made a speech at the ceremony. I smiled from the crowd and clapped like everyone else. No one knew that I had just been accepted to a dual-degree MBA program with full funding and a startup accelerator that had already agreed to seed my first business idea. I left that day without looking back. For the next 6 years, I built everything in silence. I lived frugally, worked obsessively, and reinvested every dollar. I learned the language of power, contracts, clauses, capital. I didn't date, didn't party, didn't post. I was building. And then one day, a familiar name popped up in a commercial real estate auction email. Oak Valley Academy, foreclosure pending. I clicked it. Apparently, the school had been struggling. Poor leadership, misused funds, declining enrollment. The final blow had come during a financial scandal that no one saw coming. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. I didn't hesitate. I put in an anonymous bid. And then I waited. 3 weeks later, I got the call. "Congratulations. You're the new owner of Oak Valley Academy." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stood there, silent, staring at the skyline outside my office window. The school that humiliated me was now mine. But I wasn't done. Because owning it was one thing. What I did next? That's when the real revenge began. Buying the school should have been enough. I told myself that over and over as I stared at the old red brick building from my tinted car window. The same building where I had been laughed at, spit on, mocked. Where I watched my father scrub gum off desks while kids stepped over him like he was furniture. But still, it didn't feel like victory yet. Not until they knew. The school was in worse shape than I expected. The auction paperwork hinted at debt, but nothing prepared me for the mess I walked into. The grounds were overgrown. Classrooms were underfunded, and the heating system barely worked. Most of the teachers had quit after months of unpaid wages. And those who were left? They were clinging on for dear life. I stepped through the front doors in a blazer and heels, a silent storm behind my eyes. No one recognized me at first, not the receptionist, not the 3 administrative staff still on payroll. I didn't say my name. I just introduced myself as the new owner. They straightened up instantly. The former headmistress, Ms. Claiborne, wasn't in. She'd skipped town a week before the foreclosure was finalized, apparently under investigation for embezzling school funds. That was my first clue that the rot ran deeper than student cruelty. This place had been poisoned from the top down. And Tara Langston? She was still there. Not as a student anymore. As staff. A development liaison, whatever that meant. Nepo hired, obviously. Her father was a major donor for decades before his business tanked in a quiet bankruptcy. She apparently used the school as her personal playground now, sitting in on board meetings, pushing marketing plans, even giving the occasional pep talk to current students about rising to the top. The irony made my blood boil. The same girl who mocked me for existing was now positioned as some role model. I kept my face neutral when I saw her picture on the bulletin board in the main office, her blonde curls professionally styled, lips glossy, and her title printed proudly beneath, Director of Growth Initiatives. What a joke. But it was what I learned next that turned my silent vengeance into something personal. That same afternoon, I was handed a folder, part of the transition files from the previous board. I expected budget reports, maybe vendor contacts. What I didn't expect were personnel memos. And buried inside those memos? A file with my father's name on it. Carl Carter, Custodial Services. There were several notes attached. One was a complaint from a faculty member about inappropriate conduct in the halls. Another accused him of violating school image guidelines by engaging in personal contact with a student during hours. That student was me. The accusation was filed anonymously. But stapled to the back of the complaint, someone had written a name in pen, like they hadn't realized it would be scanned and archived. T. Langston. My hands trembled as I read those pages. I felt the past crashing down like broken glass all around me. That year, my father was nearly fired. I remembered how he came home quieter. How he said the school was reviewing custodial protocol. How he stopped waving to me in the halls. I thought it was his choice, his way of protecting me. But it wasn't. He had been silenced. Targeted. Framed. Lied about. By a child who was cruel enough to file a fake report, and by a school that was cowardly enough to believe it. They didn't even ask me what happened. No one ever approached me. No one ever said a word. They just wrote him up. Put it on record. Treated my father, the man who gave everything to that place, like a danger. My heart shattered. And then it hardened. This wasn't just about schoolyard bullying anymore. This was character assassination. And worse, it was betrayal by the very institution that my dad cleaned every single night, while they spit on his name behind closed doors. But the final blow came a few days later. I stayed late in the administrator's office, reviewing digital archives. I had access to everything now, including internal communications from the time Dad was nearly fired. And that's when I found the email. From Tara Langston. Sent to Ms. Claiborne, subject line, about Carl Carter. The message read, "It's just uncomfortable, you know? Seeing him interact with students like that. Riley especially. I know they related, but the whole thing feels off. I just thought you should know. Image is everything. No evidence. No facts. Just implication." And it had worked. They had put Dad on probation. Had warned him that boundaries were important. Had never apologized, even after nothing was found. And worst of all, they'd made him question himself. I remember the day he stopped calling me kiddo in public. The day he stopped eating lunch in the school kitchen. The day he said, "I think it's better if we keep things professional when we're on campus." He was just trying to protect me. And he died never knowing why they turned on him. My breath came in ragged pulls as I leaned back in the office chair, the fluorescent light above flickering like a dying star. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. But my mind? Clear as glass. They took his dignity. They made him invisible. They erased his sacrifice. And now it was time for me to erase them. The first move I made was subtle. Strategic. I ordered a full audit of staff records, pretending it was part of a revitalization plan. HR cooperated quickly. They had no reason to doubt the new owner. Within 2 days, I had a full list of staff who had been complicit in signing off on the complaints, including teachers who had seen my dad every single day and said nothing. I drafted termination letters, each one with a clear justification: budget realignment, department restructuring, failure to meet updated hiring criteria. All legal, all airtight. But I saved Taurus for last, because hers needed to be special. I wanted her to know who I was. I wanted her to see my face when everything crumbled around her. So I made a call, invited her to a leadership consultation meeting at the school. Said I was considering a rebrand and wanted insights from people who knew the culture. She accepted immediately, ego too big to suspect anything. She showed up in high heels and a designer coat, carrying a leather folder like she was auditioning for some reality show about startup CEOs. She didn't recognize me at first. "Hi, I'm Tara, are you the investor?" I smiled. "Not quite. I'm Riley Carter." The silence was delicious. She blinked. Her mouth parted slightly. "Riley from Oak Valley. Yes. There was a pause. And then she laughed. Oh wow. You've really changed. I didn't laugh back. I know, I said. And so has the school. I own it now. Her smile faltered. I handed her the folder, a single sheet of paper inside. What's this? She asked. Your release form. Effective immediately. You're being let go. She blinked again, confused. Wait, what? Why? I leaned back. Because I read the email. Color drained from her face. And the complaints, I continued. The false accusations. The damage you did. Not just to me, to my father. Her mouth opened. That was years ago. Yes. But consequences aren't bound by time. You don't get to plant poison and then be surprised when the roots grow back up through your floorboards. She stood flustered. You can't just. This is a mistake, my father. Is broke. And no longer on the board. I walked around the desk slowly and looked her dead in the eyes. You bullied a child, framed a man, and built your entire fake career off the ashes of what you burned. But the difference between us is, I remember every moment. And I never needed to scream to be heard. She left without another word. And I stood in that office, the same one where my father was once told to keep his distance, and whispered to the empty room. You did good, Dad. I handled it. But revenge wasn't over yet. Because now, the whole school was mine. And I had plans. Big ones. The day I fired Tara Langston was the first time I truly felt peace. Not happiness, that would take time. Not satisfaction either. But peace. Like a bone that had been out of place my entire life had finally been snapped back into alignment. And still, I wasn't done. Because even though I cut off the rotting limbs of Oak Valley's old regime, the scars ran deep. This school had been built on silence, on elitism, on exclusion dressed up as tradition. And now, with the building in my name and the keys in my hand, I finally had the power to change all of it. But change doesn't come without resistance. The backlash started almost immediately. First, I received an email from a lawyer representing one of the fired board members, claiming unjust dismissal and personal bias. I expected it. I welcomed it, even. My legal team replied with a digital file of every complaint, every email, every time-stamped proof. The reply was short. Your client should be grateful we're only firing them, not pressing charges. Then came the press. An anonymous tip had been sent to the local news. They ran a story with the headline, Mystery Investor Buys Oak Valley Academy and Ousts Entire Leadership Team. I didn't hide. The next morning, I called a press conference in the school's dusty auditorium. The same one where I had once sat in the back row while Tara made a speech about student excellence. A speech she had stolen from me in 8th grade. This time, I stood at the podium. My hair was pulled back, my voice didn't shake. Many of you knew me as Riley Carter, I said. Though most of you didn't know me at all. I was the janitor's daughter. The girl in the thrift store shoes. The one you didn't think would matter. I paused. Let the silence sit. But now I own this school, and I'm going to make sure no student ever feels like I did. I announced a full-ride scholarship fund in my father's name for students from working-class families. I unveiled plans to cut tuition by 30% over the next 2 years. I fired the overpriced cafeteria vendor and rehired local cooks who actually gave a damn about the kids they served. And most importantly, I made the janitor staff full-time employees with benefits, healthcare, and paid vacation. Every single one of them. Because dignity doesn't come from titles, it comes from the way you treat people who clean your messes. After the conference, I stood in the hallway alone, running my hand along the familiar lockers. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the mean kind, and my own heart pounding in my ears. But those days were over. Or so I thought, because something unexpected happened next. Not everyone wanted me to succeed. 1 week later, I started noticing resistance. Small things at first. Flyers for my new scholarship program were mysteriously removed. Student files I requested suddenly couldn't be located. Emails went unanswered. My calendar mysteriously shifted without my knowledge. At first, I thought it was just growing pains. the natural friction of transformation. But then I walked into my office one Monday morning and found a single sticky note on my desk. Written in all caps. "You don't belong here." Neither did he. I froze. I stared at that note for a full minute before I picked it up. No signature. No handwriting I recognized. Just those words, like a punch to the chest. I had expected legal battles, media spin, maybe even wealthy parents threatening to pull donations. But this was personal. Venomous. This was someone still inside the walls of my school who hated me, and worse, who still hated my father. I checked the security footage. Nothing. The hallway outside my office had mysteriously gone black between 4:32 and 4:47 a.m. The file had been manually deleted. Someone with admin access. And that's when I realized. The poison hadn't been removed, it had just gone underground. There were still people inside Oak Valley who remembered the old order. People who benefited from it. Who hated that someone like me, someone from below, had taken the throne. They didn't just resent my power. They resented my existence. And I was no longer dealing with teenage bullies in plaid skirts. I was dealing with adults now. Cunning, strategic, dangerous. So I reacted the only way I knew how. I adapted. I brought in a forensic IT team and quietly gave them full access to the school servers. I installed backup cameras in every hallway. I digitized everything, removed all physical access to student records, and locked down the administrative drives. Then I went through every single name still on payroll. One by one, I did background checks. Not the cheap kind, the deep kind. Cross-referenced addresses, checked social media activity, even scanned for off-the-record mentions on anonymous teacher forums. And that's when I found him. Mr. Lyle Hammond, head of campus operations. On staff for 18 years. He had been friends with the old principal. Had personally recommended my father's disciplinary review back in the day. Still bitter that he'd been passed up for interim leadership after I took over. And he had root access to the system. I scheduled a meeting with him. Casual. Pretended I wanted his input on the new infrastructure upgrades. I asked him, point blank, how he felt about the changes. He smiled politely. Nodded. "I think you're doing your best," he said. I leaned forward. "My best," I said slowly, "is enough to bury anyone who thinks I shouldn't be here." His eyes twitched, just barely, but I saw it. The next morning, I terminated his contract. But before he left the premises, I stopped him at the front gate. "You know," I said, "my dad trusted you. He said you were one of the few people who treated him with basic decency." Lyle looked down at his shoes. "I did what I had to do to keep my job," he muttered. I nodded. "And I'm doing what I have to do to honor his memory." And then I walked away. Because some people don't deserve closure, they only deserve consequences. But even as I cleared the last of the mold from the foundation of this place, a part of me still wrestled with something deeper. Something heavier. Guilt. Guilt that it had taken me this long to stand up for my father. That he had died thinking maybe he had done something wrong when he hadn't. And I couldn't let that stand. So I planned something special. 2 months after taking over the school, I held a memorial assembly. I didn't announce what it was for. I just sent a mandatory invite to every student, staff member, parent, and alum I could find. They gathered in the auditorium, the same one where I had once sat, small and invisible. This time, I stood center stage, next to a large black and white portrait of my father in his uniform, smiling, holding a mop like it was a sword. I stepped to the mic. "My name is Riley Carter," I said. "I'm the daughter of a janitor. And I am the new owner of Oak Valley Academy." The room fell silent. And today, we are dedicating this auditorium in honor of the man who kept it standing for 20 years, Mr. Carl Carter. There was a collective inhale. I unveiled the plaque, carved into polished wood and mounted above the entrance. The Carl Carter Memorial Auditorium, because respect isn't earned through money, but through integrity. I saw eyes water in the crowd. Even some of the parents who used to look through me like I was made of air now looked ashamed. And for the first time in my life, I felt like someone had seen him. Really seen him. I didn't cry. Not until I got home. But when I did, I held the plaque's miniature replica in my hands, the one I'd kept for myself, and whispered, "We're not done yet, Dad. But I think we're getting there." Revenge isn't about yelling. It's about strategy. Anyone can scream into the void, but I wanted to rebuild the system that once destroyed me. And the only way to do that was with precision, purpose, and power. After the memorial assembly, the school began to change. At first, it was surface level, new policies, new staff, new security. But I didn't just want to replace the rotting wood. I wanted to redesign the entire architecture, emotionally, financially, and socially. And to do that, I needed to strike at the roots of the old power structure, the donors. The same families who funded the toxic culture, Tara Langston's father included, still had influence over alumni events, sports programs, and annual galas. They had money, and they wanted control. My takeover threatened that. So I flipped the script. Phase 1. The Gala Coup. Oak Valley's annual fundraising gala had always been the same. Champagne, string quartets, ivory tablecloths, and smug conversations about legacy. It was also where wealthy donors made their largest contributions, with strings attached, of course. This year, they expected it to be business as usual. They were wrong. I booked the same venue, the Oak Ridge Country Club, but changed everything else. The dress code was relaxed. The menu featured local vendors. The music? A live jazz band led by a former student who used to bus tables for pocket money. The centerpieces were photos, candid ones, of janitorial staff, lunch ladies, and teachers with students. No filters. Just humanity. And then, before anyone could leave, I walked on stage and held up a check for $2.5 million. "I've just made this donation," I announced, "to fully fund the Carl Carter Scholarship Program for the next 10 years. The room applauded, but I wasn't finished. "Moving forward," I continued, "Oak Valley will no longer accept donations from any family who attaches conditions to their generosity, especially when those conditions impact staffing, curriculum, or admissions." There was stunned silence. I made eye contact with 3 key donors, all part of the old guard. "If you give out of love, you're welcome. If you give for control, keep your checkbooks closed." It was bold, risky, and it worked. The story went viral, the janitor's daughter who rewrote the rules. I got interview requests, podcast invites, and a flood of applications from students across the country. Parents who once crossed the street to avoid my father now sent handwritten letters, thanking me for reminding them what real education looked like. And those toxic donors? They left quietly, powerless, irrelevant. Phase 2. Rewriting the curriculum. If I had to memorize the family trees of dead aristocrats and the GDPs of colonial empires, then so would the next generation, right? Wrong. I brought in a new academic board, one made up of passionate educators, not cronies. I rewrote the curriculum to include financial literacy, how to build wealth, not just count it, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, boundaries, and trauma resilience, ethics and legacy, asking who am I serving, instead of what can I take. I added workshops from local business owners, activists, and yes, even janitors. Because cleaning a building doesn't make you small. Sometimes, it makes you the foundation. The first time a student asked our janitorial supervisor how bleach actually breaks down bacteria, I nearly cried. We were finally asking the right questions. Phase 3. Restoring my father's honor. I still had one thing left to do, something I hadn't spoken out loud, even to myself. My father's name was still tarnished in the archived school records. The false complaints Tara had filed, the probation he was put under, it was all still there, hidden behind bureaucratic red tape. And he was gone. He couldn't defend himself. But I could. So I filed an official motion to the board, the one I now chaired, to open an ethics review of my father's disciplinary history. I submitted the falsified documents, the confession email, and witness statements from former staff who were finally willing to speak. Within a week, the board unanimously voted to clear his name. His record was erased, replaced with a commendation. The final line in his file now read, Carl Carter served with integrity, humility, and unwavering dedication. His work formed the backbone of Oak Valley Academy. His legacy lives on, not just in scholarship, but in justice. I printed that document and framed it. Hung it on the wall where his old supply closet used to be. But I wasn't done. Not until I confronted the last ghost. Tara. Firing her wasn't enough. Because she was still posting. Still pretending to be a victim. Still shaping the narrative online like she'd just been let go by a power-hungry nobody. She started a blog. Claimed I had personal vendettas, that I was using Daddy's money to settle high school drama. Daddy's money? He never had any. We couldn't even afford new tires half the time. So I invited her, one last time, to Oak Valley. Told her there was an opportunity to set the record straight. She showed up, of course. She always needed the last word. I met her at the front entrance, where Dad used to mop the marble floors. She stepped out of her car, wearing her usual smug expression. You called me here to gloat? She asked. No, I said. I called you here to give you a choice. I handed her 2 papers. One was a legal cease and desist, a warning that her defamatory blog posts were being tracked and documented. The other was a pre-written letter, a public apology, admitting what she did. Not just to me, but to my father. You want me to sign this? She sneered. I want you to grow up, I said. But I'll settle for accountability. She laughed. You really think anyone cares about your sad janitor sob story? This is all performative. I didn't blink. If it's also performative, I said, why are you here? Why haven't you built something of your own yet? That shut her up. Eventually, she signed. She made it public. She said she was young and reckless, that she fabricated stories to feel important, and that she owed an apology to a man who only ever showed kindness. The post got 1.8 million views. But it wasn't about the views. It was about the truth finally echoing louder than the lie. The school flourished. In a year, Oak Valley became a model for ethical education. We partnered with local trade programs. Our students volunteered more than any other private school in the district. And for the first time ever, our custodial team received Teacher of the Month awards. Because teaching isn't just done with books, sometimes it's done with brooms. And I became more than the janitor's daughter. I became the proof that dignity, when held long enough, becomes power. It should have ended there. Tara gone. The old board dismantled. My father's name cleared. The scholarships launched. The halls of Oak Valley buzzing with students who didn't care about whose parents donated what or who arrived in a Tesla. But revenge has this strange quality. It echoes, long after the last word is spoken. And for me, the loudest echo came in the form of a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name, penned in careful block print on the front. Riley Carter. It was delivered to the front office one rainy morning, weeks after the final ceremony dedicating the new Carl Carter Library wing. I almost tossed it aside, assuming it was another parent request, but something about the handwriting felt familiar. I opened it slowly, and the first line stopped my breath. Your father wasn't supposed to be the janitor. He was supposed to be the principal. I sat down, hard. The letter was signed, Eleanor Walsh. That name sent a jolt through me. She was the school secretary during my first year. Soft-spoken. Silver hair always pulled into a tight bun. She used to slip me mints during long assemblies and pretend not to notice when I cried quietly behind the vending machine. She'd retired the same year my father died. I hadn't thought about her in years. The letter continued. Carl interviewed for the principal position in 2002. He had glowing references. 10 years of administrative experience at his old district. He would have been perfect. But then he brought you with him to the second interview, couldn't afford childcare that day, I think, and one of the board members made a comment. If he can't afford a babysitter, how can he lead a school? The offer was quietly rescinded. They told him the position had been filled internally. Weeks later, they offered him a janitorial role. Said it was the only opening. He took it. He needed the income. And he never said a word to you. Because he didn't want you to feel ashamed. I thought you should know. I read the letter 3 times. Each time, my hands shook more. I had spent years thinking my father chose that job, that he had swallowed his pride because he believed in hard work and quiet dignity, which he did. But now, I realized he was robbed. He had walked into that building ready to leave, and they had shoved a mop into his hands instead. They had erased his worth before he even had a chance to show it. He had been humiliated. And yet, he never told me. Not once. Because protecting my image had always mattered more to him than restoring his own. I sat in that office for hours after everyone had left. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My grief had shape-shifted too many times by then, from sadness to guilt, to rage, to purpose, and now, back to something too heavy to name. I looked up at the plaque on the wall. His name, carved into oak. His face in the center of our school's mission statement. His scholarship helping dozens of kids already. But it wasn't enough. Because they hadn't just taken away his pride. They had taken his potential. They had taken the future he had earned. And now, years later, I had a decision to make. The next day, I called a special board meeting. I brought the letter. I read it out loud. And then I made my proposal. We renamed the principal's office. Silence. I continued. We removed the current title. No more executive director. No more bureaucratic nonsense. We call it what it should have been all along. I clicked the projector. A slide appeared. The Carl Carter Leadership Suite. I heard a gasp from one of the newer teachers. I looked at the room. I don't want him remembered for mopping floors, I said. I want him remembered for what he could have been, and what he still became, despite everything. Because this school owes him more than we can ever repay. The vote was unanimous. 2 weeks later, a ceremony was held. Press came. Alumni returned. I gave a short speech. This time, I cried. And when they unveiled the new office name, etched in gold above the doorway, I felt something in me finally release. For the first time in my life, I felt like my father had won. That evening, I walked alone through the empty school. The hallways were quiet. The walls freshly painted. The trophy cases cleaned, not by invisible workers, but by respected staff with benefits and titles and faces everyone now knew. I stopped outside the janitor's closet. It had been turned into a reading nook now. Comfy chairs. Soft lamps. A shelf of books, his favorite westerns and detective novels. I leaned against the wall and whispered, "They finally see you, Dad." And for once, I didn't feel like the janitor's daughter. I felt like a legacy. But just as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. A message. From a number I didn't recognize. It read, "You think it's over. It's not. Ask what really happened in the boiler room that year. You don't know everything." My stomach twisted. I stared at the message. The boiler room? That year? The year they almost fired him? I thought I'd read every document, exposed every lie, but this felt different, unfinished. The screen went dark in my hand. A new realization swept through me, cold and sharp. This wasn't just about what they did to me. It was about what they never let him tell me. There was one last secret still buried inside these walls. And I wasn't going to stop until I found it. Because they bullied me for being the janitor's daughter. But now I owned the school. And I was about to uncover the final truth. They thought I'd never find.